The term court feel is everywhere right now in performance shoe discussions as well as marketing. And even I use that term quite a bit without really ever explaining what I mean by it. But is it even a real thing? And if it is it something you actually want? So today we're breaking down what court feel actually is, what creates it, and whether it helps or hurts your performance, as well as long-term health. Now, court feel is kind of a garbage basket term. It encapsulates a lot of perceived feelings, but I define it as the perception of ground contact and the speed of the feedback loop between brain, foot, shoe, and surface, which allows your brain to know where your feet are in space. But there's also another very simple definition, and that would be confidence with your footing. But here's the thing, the ways in which a shoe can be better for court feel may not be what you think. And when you realize what actually helps with foot confidence and proprioception, because that's really what court feel is, you may not really want it. Let me explain. Okay, so first off, what makes a shoe better or worse for court feel? The most obvious factor people think of is midsole thickness, and for sure it plays a big role. A thinner stack means less material between you and the floor, which can speed up that brain-foot feedback loop. But it's not just about height. Midsole density matters even more according to current research. Because what happens is soft midsoles tend to absorb and buffer ground reactive forces, reducing the stimulation of your mechanoreceptors in your foot's sole. Now, conversely, a firmer midsole will transmit those same ground reactive forces more directly, which boosts sensory input to your central nervous system. When people think of soft, cushy, very comfortable foam, they think of the shock absorption from the foot impacting the foam, but they don't think of the shock absorption from the ground into the shoe too. That absorption is also absorbing ground reactive forces, which are those equal and opposite forces coming back up your leg after you strike the ground. But remember, when those ground reactive forces happen, it's not just shock coming back up your foot, it's all that data, right, coming back into your brain telling you where your foot is in space. And if that gets blunted, the court feel gets blunted too. What also happens with softer midsole foams is that it takes longer to establish a position or to create force to push off, versus a stiffer midsole, which has better coupling between the foot and the ground, meaning it just transmits that force faster and more efficiently. That data gets into that feedback loop between the surface, your foot, and your brain faster, so your brain now is getting more data per unit time. The other huge factor influencing court feel that I don't think people pay attention to at all is the fit of the shoe, just in terms of the uppers and the width. There was a really good dissertation paper showing that just plain shoe fit influenced proprioception and transmission of signals to the brain. So a really easy way to increase feel is just to literally feel better in your shoe, so the discomfort isn't competing for attention with the biofeedback from the ground. And also, this has been studied more and more recently, but heel to toe drop also matters in this equation a lot. A lower drop shoe is going to allow more foot engagement, potentially more range of motion, and increased proprioceptive feedback across the entire foot, because there's just less heel bias to it, so more of your foot is able to feel more of the ground. But the funny thing is in terms of the midsoles, there's actually a decent amount of research. But in terms of what's actually touching the ground, the first thing in that feedback loop, the rubber, the science of rubber is actually a little bit muddier when it comes to proprioception. So, sometimes they say, silence can be louder than words. I think that's true in this case because, number one, there are no peer-reviewed studies dealing with rubber and proprioception, at least that I can find. And so what I'm about to tell you in this is just solely based on my experience and just industry data. This could really be an interesting kind of future research path though in dealing with this. But as of right now, here are the two schools of thought. On outdoor courts, the same rules are going to apply for midsoles. The harder rubbers with thin patterns like herringbone will transmit force and improve feel better than thicker flat patterns. The problem here is that in like tennis, for example, that's going to decrease the durability versus a thicker, wider pattern, which are kind of the norm right now in tennis shoes. What it's also going to do is a lot of times it's going to stick into the ground too much. You'll end up having inversion ankle sprains. That's why you see a lot of tennis shoes with a little bit more chunky, flat patterns. On indoor surfaces though, like, hardwood and vinyl, a soft, thin, high-tack rubber will physically grab those surfaces better because the inherent friction is so much less on those particular surfaces that type of rubber will just grab faster and speed up that feedback loop, which in turn will enhance court feel. But as we all know, too tacky of rubber on indoor courts can lead to abnormal forces through major muscle and tendon groups, as well as cause difficulty with position correction, which can lead to ankle sprains and knee injuries. So like most things, it's best to try to find a balance between the tack and the forgiveness. So let's say for argument's sake, you want all the court feel you can get. That means a low stack, firmer foamed, low drop shoe with appropriate fit and either hard thin rubber for outdoor courts or soft thin rubber for indoor. But what does all of that also mean for you? Number one, it means more shock up the leg, so more chances of things like shin splints, stress fractures, or knee and back pain. A lower heel to toe drop has been proven to lead to muscle fatigue, can be a contributing factor to plantar fasciitis, Achilles tendonitis, and Achilles ruptures if your body is not properly conditioned to it. And even sometimes if it is properly conditioned to it, it can still happen. Super tacky rubber, like I just said, can lead to inversion injuries, overload in the Achilles, or the knee. If you really want to scare yourself, go look up the old injuries at the Australian Open before they switched to the new hard court surface they use, because the old one used to be super tacky and it would heat up in the Australian summer and people were blowing their knees out like crazy on that surface before they ended up switching it. All right, so knowing all of this now, does court feel still matter to you as much? If it does, then here are the foams I think do the best job of providing it, but also providing enough support in other ways so you aren't paying as high of a price on your body. Okay, so first off, I think we're looking at everything as a whole. I think Adidas Bounce Pro is probably number one here, at least in my opinion. If you're looking for a thermoplastic or PEBA-based foam, I think Leaning Boom foam is really good because it's got the structure needed, so does Adidas Boost. UA Under Armour Flow Foam is probably the best of all these, but since they use it as an outsole too, the performance can be so up and down when it comes to grip, it's kind of hard to evaluate it as a separate component. So if Under Armour starts making basketball shoes with like hybrid flow and rubber, I think that would probably take the top spot from Bounce Pro. And I know a lot of you are just gonna destroy me in the comments for this, but don't sleep on injection molded Nike Phylon either. Phylon is used in most Nike tennis shoes for a reason. Yeah, it's very cheap, but it also does a really good job of kind of coupling the foot to the ground and being able to transmit those biofeedback loops very easily. And right there brings up another interesting point, because if you read between the lines, court feel can also be a synonym for something else. Cheap shoes, less foam, cheaper foam, less durable rubber. So there's also that to contend with too. But if I had to say, if court feel was a key contributing factor to whether or not I'm gonna be recommending a shoe, I would say yes, but as part of an aggregate of factors. What I mean by that is it has to be good enough. There are a lot of other factors to me that are just as important, especially recommending shoes to patients. So as long as a shoe isn't bad for court feel, meaning overly floppy, too bouncy feeling to the point of losing control, tacky to a fault, or so low stacked everywhere that I feel like I'm gonna snap metatarsal, then I'm happy. And speaking of good feeling foams, if you do want to see a comparison of all the top foams on the market right now, their pros and cons, what each of them are good for, kind of matching them to your particular style or your particular needs or sport, make sure you click into this video right here. It's all in one video. Make sure you subscribe down below. I'll see you in that video.